I'm awake early on a Sunday morning, fizzing with energy because this is going to be published in about 9 days' time. So to keep myself calm, I've been doing some sketching, and so I thought I would sketch Ashworth Manor House. So this is the fictional location where a lot of the action in book one, The Resistance Girls, actually takes place. And I'm quite pleased with how it's turned out. I've kind of modelled it on a local manor house, Burley Manor, but there's a lot of extra additions that I've put in, added lots more chimneys. So this is a pencil sketch, and I've got my watercolours out, and I think what I'm going to do is see if I can add a layer of colour to this to make it really pop off the page. So I'm going to start with the sky because that's the bit that tends to stress me out when I'm actually laying paint on. I'm using watercolours, and I've actually used an old empty half pan to mix up a load of wet ultramarine. So this is a solid half pan of ultramarine, and this is actually it all mixed up with a lot of water, so I've got it in the right consistency to be able to cover quite a big area. Okay, so I've got really quite a large brush here. You can see it's a typical round brush. I'm just going to test the paint in a little corner. Yes, I'm quite happy with that consistency. So I'm going to start adding at the top with dark and hopefully bringing the colour down just across the sky there, keeping it very wet, keeping it moving, just dragging it side to side, picking more up, going beyond what will actually be the defined areas of the painting, just coming across there. Oh, pick that little bit up there, adding a little bit more water because I'd like it to maybe fade down a little bit towards the house. So we've got this lovely dark colour at the top of the painting. So the next thing I'm going to do is probably put a little bit of colour in the roof there. I'm going to work from the top down so I don't accidentally put my hand in any wet paint. So I've got sepia paint over here, which I'm going to be using. I've woken that up a little bit earlier on. I want a fairly weak tea consistency of this, just to start with, because I can always put more paint on later. I'm just going to pop that across the top there. There we go. We can add some extra texture in later. Just want a layer of colour to start with, and then we can work on top of that later. The next thing is to think about the walls, and this is a red brick manor house, and so I've got a classic light red and a burnt sienna. Now the classic light red is actually really quite a red colour, whereas the burnt sienna has got orangey undertones to it, and I kind of think I want a mix of the two, so I'm going to start with the burnt sienna because I can always add in the red later. And I'm just going to literally pop that in as a very light layer of the red brickwork, just to start with. And it is just a suggestion of where the colour needs to be. thought I'd put a little bit of the suggestion of the vegetation in as well at the moment. Now this, because these trees are in the distance, I've mixed up a sort of bluey green using a bit of indigo and some hooker's green. Simply because there's vegetation in the distance tends to be quite blue in colour, and you don't tend to see quite so much detail. So I'm going to be quite vague as I pop this on for very distant vegetation, because I'm not too worried about detail from that. I don't want to draw away from the centre of the painting. Okay, so a little bit more green maybe for this one that's in front of this. Again, not putting too much detail in, but I am just being a little bit vague with some of the colours and the shapes. Leaving little bits of white in as well. That's always a good idea at this stage, because you can always put more colour on, but you can never get right back to that beautiful, beautiful white of the paper. As I move closer to the front, I will use more sap green and less of the blue. But for the time being, I'm still a little bit in the distance here with this particular bush here, I think. And again, a little bit of suggestion, but not too much detail. Right, okay. Okay, we're going to move into more of the sap green here on the front of the house, because I really love this colour. I'm coming right down into the foreground here, because I'm not quite sure where I'm going to actually crop my painting afterwards. So I'm going to obviously paint a lot of extra ground so that it gives me plenty of choice as to where I crop it in once I'm finished and looking to think about maybe framing. Interesting bit of colour popped in there that I didn't want. Just blend that in. And again, with these streaks, which are quite a useful way to sort of finish the bottom of painting, just dragging some paint across and leaving elements of white in it, which may or may not end up in the final painting. So if that's all wet, I'm going to have to let that dry in a minute so that I can actually get on with the next bit. Just going to finish popping a little bit of detail into some of this greenery here, not as much as there will be in the front in the end. The next stage of the painting is basically going back into the layers that I've already put down and adding in areas of shadow to pull that sort of three-dimensional feel of the building off the page. So you can see me now adding in a much more intense version of that red-brown over the original, I think it was a burnt umber I used. And that is, I'm only putting that on one plane of the house, leaving the gable and the side lighter, as if the sort of the light is hitting that, and then there's more of a shadow at the front, and that will enhance the three dimensions. No idea why, but doing these little sort of L shapes in the windows, just to suggest the panes of glass, is actually very, very effective. As you get further away, you obviously don't get quite the same shape, but the suggestion of the window panes being there is really important. There we go, I'm quite pleased with that. I'm going to do a similar sort of shadow effect on the inside of that sort of porch door, so that you've got the suggestion that there actually is something in there going in. And the next stage is to work round the rest of the painting again, adding areas of intense shadows into the sections of the building where obviously a shadow would fall, and that again makes the structure of the building pop and gives you a real three-dimensional element. So I'm just going to move around and pick out areas where I think that would have a good effect. I'm going to work on the little bit of gravel here that's really the driveway. I'm going to put a suggestion of that in there as well, just to fill this section in with a little bit of colour. Again, not too much detail, just dragging this colour across. In exactly the same way as I added depth to the physical structure of the building, I'm going to do a similar thing with the vegetation and go in with a more intense version of the greens that I used to start with. And I'm looking to sort of add shadows to the sort of under sections of any sort of clumps of leaves. I'm going to add in a few shadows along the bottom here, just to break up the distance in this foreground. And of course there would be shadows from the house. The danger with any sort of painting is that you fidget with it for far too long, but that's Ashworth Manor finished for me. I've really enjoyed it. It's been very, very relaxing. And there it is, the fictionalised location for some of the action from my novel, The Resistance Girls.